My people came to me, Dan Coates came to me, and some others. They said they think it's Russia. I have President Putin. He just said it's not Russia. I will say this. I don't see any reason why it would be. I have great confidence in my intelligence people, but I will tell you that President Putin was extremely strong and powerful in his denial.
That was President Trump last summer in Helsinki with Russian President Vladimir Putin, and the man we're about to talk to regards that as the low point in terms of American presidents conducting diplomacy. NBC News has gotten a glimpse at a report prepared by the Estonian Foreign Intelligence Service, which concludes Russia is likely to target European parliamentary elections in May. Goes on to say that through cyber espionage campaigns similar to what we saw in 2016, they hope to secure as many pro-Russian or Euro-skeptical seats as possible within the EU, which is, of course, already under challenge. With us tonight is Ambassador William Burns, former U.S. ambassador to Russia from 2005 to 2008. He served as a diplomat for over 3 decades, working under 5 presidents, holds the highest rank as a career ambassador. He's currently president of the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. He also happens to be the author of a new book, The Back Channel, a memoir of American diplomacy and the case for its renewal. Welcome. We're so happy to have you on the broadcast.
Thanks so much. It's great to be with you.
For those who didn't pay attention during the history of the Cuban Missile Crisis, begin with the definition. What traditionally is a back channel?
Well, back channel is generally when you set up a connection with a foreign government that's, it's not visible, as most channels are. And sometimes you do it through people who are connected to a leadership and sometimes directly with the leadership itself. It's what we did with the Iranians through all of 2013 and conducting the secret nuclear talks.
Tell us about the impression you got of Vladimir Putin as a visiting American diplomat.
Well, he's a combustible combination, in my experience, of grievance and ambition and insecurity. He's got a big chip on his shoulder, a strong conviction that the United States and the West took advantage of Russia's moment of historical weakness in the 1990s, and has spent most of his 20 years now as Russia's leader pushing back and getting even. And trying to demonstrate that, Russia's not going to be taken advantage of anymore.
Did he ever dare to dream the kind of reach and influence he now has in our system?
No, I think it's beyond his imagination. I think what Putin saw was dysfunction and polarization in our system, and he sees this in the European political systems as well. He saw that as an opportunity to sow chaos. I think it was beyond his imagination that by putting his thumb on the scale against Hillary Clinton and for President Trump, he was actually going to help produce that kind of a victory.
You know, because you see the contemporary news coverage, that people blame Russian trolls and bots for things like the anti-vaccination movement. People think the Brexit vote in the UK was kind of the first test case of Russian probing. On a cost-benefit analysis, as you point out, hasn't this exceeded their wildest fever dreams?
It certainly has, because it's pretty cheap. It's pretty inexpensive to, hire a couple of hundred, technologists to try to exploit fissures in democratic systems elsewhere. And Putin is a master of that, at taking advantage, in a sense, of his own weakness, but because he's very good at manipulating the weaknesses he sees in other systems. He's tactically very agile.
That moment in Helsinki when the one we just showed, Donald Trump comes out alongside Vladimir Putin. What happened inside you? And can you speak for other career diplomats in this nation's system?
Sure. I mean, I think it reflected, you see this often from President Trump, a kind of disdain for the hard work of diplomacy and a conviction that relationships promoting American interests are all about building personal relationships. And of course, that's important. But indulging dictators, trying to curry favor with them, is generally seen by people like Vladimir Putin as a sign of weakness and manipulability. And that's what he saw on that stage in Helsinki.
Is there a best case scenario for meeting with someone like that?
Yeah, I think it's, first you have to do your homework. I think you have to do a lot of preparatory work so that you try to narrow differences and you have a very realistic view of what you can achieve. And then I think you have to demonstrate firmness where you're pushing back against threatening actions from another party. It's possible to manage even the most complicated adversarial relationships, but you have to have a respect for the hard work of diplomacy and backed up by military and economic leverage.
For all the kids studying foreign relations who got into college, we hope, on the up and up, and their parents watching tonight, is it going to be normal? The people who are hoping to be desk officers at the State Department, if they're that lucky, is it going to return to normal?
Oh, I'm an optimist over the medium term about the importance of diplomacy and more broadly about the importance of public service, however much it may be belittled or disdained today. You know, when I was about to take the Foreign Service exam 40 years ago, my dad, who was a career Army officer, wrote me a letter, and he said that nothing can make you prouder than to serve your country with honor. And I spent the next 3.5 decades discovering the wisdom of that. And I think there's another generation of Americans who will too. Public service is filled with honorable, hardworking, patriotic people, and they serve the interests of our country. And I'm confident that we're going to restore people's understanding of that.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.